Hello everybody. In this video, we're going to show a very common type of a code where you loop through a list and you have an if inside that loop. All right, let's get going. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has achieved success at an incredibly diverse range of activities. Football, being the most electrifying man in sports entertainment history, acting, business, and music. On top of that, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is black and Samoan all at the same time. If you don't like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, then I question your commitment to diversity. For this assignment, we've made a lab to convert words and phrases into words and phrases as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson might say them. The purpose of which is to spice up your vocabulary or maybe serve as a shortcut if you're a scriptwriter in Hollywood. Let's get started with the lab. Here is the starter code, and since you've done this before, I'm going to zoom through this quick. So let's go to step 1, which is to create the function. Now, hopefully this will be almost automatic, so ideally, maybe you try it out first and then just watch the video if you don't get it for some reason. But if not, here we go. We're going to create a function called The Rock Says. So it's always def, function name, parentheses, colon. I have one parameter. Remember, the parameters go inside those parentheses. The parameters do two things. They get the information from the outside world, and then after that, they're just regular variables. So again, we want to name these just like regular variables. The parameter is a list of words and phrases. So a good variable name would be something like words. The S indicating that we have a list. Plural S goes with plural list. And I'm going to stick a P in front of it, the parameter. The P stands for parameter, which is going to avoid namespace errors that can be hard to debug. And it's return, so I'm just going to write return right here, just so I don't forget. So now we're at step 2. We've given you the algorithm, so it's probably best if you try it yourself and just come back if you get stuck. With that said, here we go. Step A, create a new empty list at the beginning. This list will be used to contain new words and phrases. So if you remember, to create a list, I go list name equals to square brackets. So I'll do that now. I'll give it a good name. I'll call it new words, words S, which tells me it's a list. And we're done with step A. B, loop through all of the items in the original list. So if you'll remember, the way I loop through items in a list is for item in list. So here it will be for word in P words. My original list is P underscore words. Now it's about this time I want to go over the main mistake that people make when they do this kind of code, is that they'll do something like this. P words is equal to, and they'll make a list here. And this is not what you want to do. One of the reasons that we use parameters is so that we can get information from the outside world, which allows us to reuse our code over and over and over on different pieces of data. So if you remember what we did in introduction and favorite numbers, we're getting information from the outside world. We're not redefining these variables inside of the function. We did the same in the Biggest Pumpkins lab. So don't define your parameter, in this case, P underscore words, inside the function. Because if you do, the function will only work on this exact data, which we don't want it to do. We want it to work on all data. So the way we have it set up here, it's going to loop through all the words in P words. And P words can be anything, which we will set outside the function when we call it. Next up, step 3, 3 scenarios. So hopefully you'll remember by now, if I have the word test, check, scenarios, what you're going to want to have in your code is an if, and possibly elif and else. So that's what we want here. We have 3 scenarios, scenario 1, scenario 2, and then a default scenario, so that will be the else. All right, scenario 1, we're checking to see if the item starts with SM. So there's a few ways to do this. The first way is to use a string method, which we have not taught you yet. We could say if word dot starts with SM. We could do that, but we have not taught you that yet, so I'm not going to do that. That's actually the best way to do it, but again, we haven't taught that to you yet. But we can check to see if the first letter is S, so I'll do that now. If word bracket 0, remember the lists start with 0, and I'm going to check to see if this is equal to S. Now this is not going to be enough. I need to check to see if the second letter is an M. So in this type of scenario, I'm going to use a compound Boolean. I'll need to have 2 Boolean expressions, and I'll need to join them with either and or. In this case, I need them both to be true. And when I need both things to be true, I'll use an and. So I can do this if word 1 is equal to M. And what does it want? It wants a new item to be appended to the new list. Do you smell what the rock is cooking? So how do we add items to lists? We use list methods, and the way that works is list.method. And the particular method we use is append. So the way it works is list.append. What's our list? New underscore words dot append. And what are we adding to it? Do you smell what the rock is cooking? And that is our if. Now I'm going to get rid of the elif and the else for now, just so I can test this if. So if you look back at step 1, it says it returns this new list of words and phrases. So what we're going to return is new underscore words. And let's test it out. So remember, when I have a function with a return, I'm going to save it to a variable. Variable equals to function. How do I call a function? It's the function name and the parentheses. And inside the parentheses go the arguments that match to the parameters. So I'm going to hard code my argument here and just say smell, small, and blah. And I'll print out what's returned. So I expect this to return a 2-item list. When it loops over smell, I expect it to append do you smell what the rock's cooking to this new words list. Same thing with small and blah, it won't do anything. So it should return me a 2-item list. And when I run it, that is what I get. So I feel good about this test, but I just want to show one other thing, and that is this. I can rewrite this. I'm going to rewrite it as a slice. So I can check S and M at the same time if I use a slice, just like that. Slices work on strings. Slices work on lists as well. And if I have just, 2 characters to check, it probably doesn't matter. But if I have 10 characters, 20 characters, for sure I'll want to use a slice, or I'll want to use that ends with. But for now, we're showing you how to use slices. And that completes the first scenario, which I've now tested. All right, so now let's look at the next part. Again, I have 3 scenarios, so that means I'll need an if, elif, and an else. I think I'm going to do the else first, so let's do number 3 next. So I have an else. Whenever you see the words for everything else, a default scenario, you should be thinking of an else. And what am I doing here? A new item will be added to the list. The new item will end with the old item and have the rock says concatenated to the front. So you've done concatenation with strings. If you'll remember we are going to concatenate or join strings with the plus. So I'll make it a temporary variable, new string equals to. It said I want to concatenate the rock says to the front. And again, I'm using a plus to concatenate. And what am I adding to the end? I'm adding the new word. So that's the variable word here. Now I have to be a little bit careful here. In this case, I have not put a space between says and the word. And so there won't be a space. Now I usually want that to be a space. So again, Python will not stick a space in unless you stick a space in inside those quotation marks. And then I'll need to add this to the new words list. How do I add to a list? Again, it's append. I'm adding the new strings variable. And let's try this out. And actually, I can still probably use the same test. I'm expecting now a new list of 3 items. The first 2 will be, do you smell what the rock is cooking? And the last one will be, the rock says blah. So let's try this out. I'll clear this first. And that is what I get, and my test is good. As you write your codes, you want to be sure that you test every single if, elif, else scenario. Maybe you're not going to test it right as you go, but you should definitely test it at the end. Remember, if it's not tested, it's broken. So with that said, we just did the first and third scenarios. Let's do the second one now. Here, I need to test to see if the word ends in think. If the word ends in think, a new item will be added to the new list. It doesn't matter what you think. Now, one way I could do it is use word.ends with, and this is a string method, but you haven't learned that yet from us anyway. So I'm going to use something different. If you remember from lists, I can count backwards. So if I say list -1, that's the last item in the list. List -2, that's the second to last item in the list. And the same thing applies for strings. So I could do it this way and test the letters one by one, and so on and so on and so forth. But this is not the best way to do it. If I do it this way with a lot of ands, it makes my Boolean expression very, very, very long. It's not what I want to do. So once again, I want to use a slice. I want to go from 5th to last letter all the way to the end. So it'll look kind of like this. And I want to check to see if it's equal to think. And what am I going to do in this scenario? I'm going to add something to my new words list. So again, that's the list.append. That's how I add to a list. And what am I adding? It doesn't matter what you think. One little trick for prints is that when I have a single quotation here, I want this outside to be a double quotation. And if for some reason I wanted this to be a double quotation, I want the outside to be single quotation. And there are ways to do even more complicated things. You can Google escape characters if you want to do that. but we're not going to talk about that right now. All right, so let's try this out. I'm going to change my test and give it something with think at the end. So group think. And if this works correctly, I expect it to give me back, do you smell what the rock is cooking? Do you smell what the rock is cooking? The rock says blah, and it doesn't matter what you think. So let's try this out. And that's what I get. Finally, I want to show one of the things that people will screw up. They'll mess this up and they'll do like, I don't know, 4 here and -1 here. Or maybe they'll do 5 and -1. And the program won't work. And they'll wonder why it doesn't work. So I just want to show a debugging tip. So in this scenario, I can't get it to work, and I don't know why. The answer is to use a print. So I'll print out what I'm using to make this Boolean check. So I'll run it now. And these are what I thought were the last 5 letters of my words. But instead, it's really just the last 4. So again, when I see this, I go, oh, I'm not printing out that last letter. I'll change this. And I'll go, oh, that's the fix I need to make. So again, a lot of times things are not going to work. And the answer is you should print out what the variables are. Now we're at step 3, the last part in the main part of the code. Use the starter code and do this. Inside of the loop, call the rock says function and print out what it returns. So I already have the code for this. It's right here. I'm going to put it into here. And that's pretty much all I need to do. Now, this starter code is something that we've given you. It's one of those things that a lot of people end up using on their APCSP create task. You're not allowed to have just a function and then call it once. You really need to call your function in a loop or multiple times in the code. And this is a very easy way to get that done. And what this code does is it keeps on running. It keeps on calling your function until you type quit. That's what this while does. It takes whatever I typed in to input, which is saved as a string, and turns it into a list using this split method. Basically, I'll run it. Before I run it, actually, I'm going to get rid of this hard-coded string and replace it with all words. So one more time, I'll give it a list of words separated by spaces. The split will turn that into a list. It'll turn my string into a list. I'll call my function on that list, and then I'll print out what it gives me. And it'll keep on going until I type quit. So A, B, C. There's 1. Smell, think, banana. There's another. And if I type quit, it should end, and it does. And again, this is the kind of thing that people put into their create task so that you comply with some of the complexity requirements of that code. Finally, I want to comment on the significance of this lab. For the APCSP create task, one of the things you'll need to do is have a loop and an if inside of a function. And a lot of times, students will struggle with how to come up with something like this. And one of the easiest ways to meet this requirement is to have an if inside of a loop, just as you did inside this lab. So now I'll zoom through 4 other examples of ifs inside loops. So for this first one right here, I can find the even numbers by looping through a whole bunch of numbers and then running a test to see if that number is even. I could loop through an ingredient list and use an if to test for the ingredients that are bad for allergies. I see this one a lot in CSP create tasks. I can loop through names and count particular names. I can loop through anything and count up how many times something in particular shows up. And I could do a shopping inventory check where I'm looping through every item I want and I'm using if to test to see if that item is in stock. And this I've seen a whole bunch on CSP create tasks. So hopefully this gives you some ideas about how you can combine loops and ifs to make a larger program. All right, so that's pretty much it. Hope that was useful to you. And if it was, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next time.